For years, we've talked about Mideast wars in Bible prophecy. Well, there's something new to talk about now. And here to talk about that something new is Bill Salus, our old friend. Hi, Bill. How are you?
Hey, Gary. It's great to be with you. I just love being in these new studios.
Well, Bill, you grace them beautifully, I must say. I'm holding here a DVD called The Prophetic Mideast Wars, America plus Israel versus Israel plus Iran. Now, that's a mouthful, and we're going to actually flesh this out as we go through the program today. You've been doing a lot of research. What started the research?
Well, you know, through the years, we've done programs talking about all these Middle East wars with respects to the destruction of Damascus and, of course, Ezekiel 38, the big marquee event that's going on. But, you know, we're watching what's going on right now with respects to the world, especially with this Donald Trump being the president and him presenting his peace plan, the deal of the century, with the peace to prosperity segment within it. And we're seeing Israel move on that. We're seeing them talking about doing the annexation. As we sit here today, we don't necessarily know what the results will be, but it looks like Israel's going to try to seize the opportunity to annex more territory, which would be unprecedented, really. They've annexed territory after wars, but this would be part of a political move. And of course, the repercussions of that and the potential prophetic implications of that could be staggering, Gary.
Absolutely. Now, let's begin by talking about the participants in the battle. In Ezekiel 38, you talk about 15 participants in the battle. That's a lot of people.
Right. Usually when people study the Ezekiel invasion, they're just talking about the Magog invaders, the Ezekiel invaders. And of course, there are real key important individuals there, which usually we'd say those would be Russia, Turkey, Iran. The general consensus would then go on to talk about Ethiopia, and you get down into the northern African countries and part of the other parts of Africa countries, Sudan and Somalia, perhaps Algeria, Morocco, and Tunisia. So that's a general consensus of who they are. I mean, some people even put Germany in there as a possibility with Gomer. But we need to remember there's other participants. One is there's the victor, which is God. This is not a normal military invasion. God stops this supernaturally, not the Israeli Defense Forces, not the American forces. Israel's the intended victim. Fortunately, they don't get taken out because God stops it. But you also have these other four participants in Ezekiel 38, verse 13, that seem to be protesters. And my concern is, who are they? And might we find America and the UK as among this group here? It looks like you're by that verse. Do you want to read it?
All right, I could read that. Ezekiel 38:13 mentions some groupings of people. Sheba, Dedan, the merchants of Tarshish, with all the young lions thereof, shall say unto thee, art thou come to take a spoil? When Gog comes, they all say, what are you doing? Are you coming to take loot from our country?
And that's the motive of it. They're coming to take plunder and booty from an Israel that's dwelling securely in the midst of their land. They've been regathered from the nations of the world. All these details are very specific in the prophecy. They're living without walls, unwalled villages, dwelling securely, but they're possessing this great plunder and booty, which is what Russia's putting its coalition together to come after. And so on the sidelines, you have these four groups. We'll identify them as who we best determine they are. But among them are the merchants of Tarshish. Now, not the athletes of Tarshish, not the politicians of Tarshish or the entertainers, the merchants. So it's talking about Russia's coming after commerce and commercial interests. And here's people on the sidelines protesting that, going, well, we have commercial interests with Israel. That's more than likely what their vantage point is.
Yeah.
What are you doing? You're going to disrupt our commercial and merchant scenarios with Israel, our contracts. And so,
and when you think about that, global merchant traffic is absolutely huge. And has been ever since really the early days, back in the days of the Phoenician traders, right up to the present. And it is the global economy. And Isaiah mentions that, of course, the merchants are mentioned in Revelation at the very end of the Bible, end of the tribulation period. the merchants play a huge role.
They are. This is kind of a major theme within the Bible throughout time, and in this prophecy, the merchants of Tarshish. Of course, Revelation 18, you got the merchants of the earth are weeping when commercial Babylon gets destroyed. So they do play an important role. With respects to the merchants of Tarshish, they are actually got a long history in the Bible. They're mentioned 7 different times in the Bible when in relationship with Tarshish. Tarshish shows up quite a bit in the Bible. Matter of fact, in the DVD, what I do is I go to great lengths to present the geographical, the biblical, the archaeological, and the geopolitical reasons why I believe America deserves more than an honorable mention as a prime candidate for one of being the young lions of the merchants of Tarshish in here. So for instance, you get into who is Tarshish. I talk about that Tarshish was actually one of the sons of Javan along with his brothers, and they actually divided we're told in Genesis 10 verses 4 through 5, they actually divided the isles. It talks about specifically the isles, which shows up 5 different times in relationship to Tarshish having to deal with the isles. So we talk about Tarshish, and then the young lions, of course, would be the colonies that shoot out from the loins of the mother country per se. So we take our eye on the British Islands. Well, there's over the British Isles, there's over 6,000 islands, and about 136 of them are inhabited. It clearly is isles per se. So a lot of us would say, well, there's one implication that maybe Tarshish is dealing with the isles, the British Isles per se. Now, Gary, some people say, well, maybe it's Spain. The 2 arguments is who could Tarshish be would be the UK or Spain, because some people connect Tartessus, or there's another pronunciation for what?
Yeah, Tartosa.
Tartosa, yeah. Tartessus versus Tartosa.
But yeah, it's called that currently. If you look at a modern map, it's Tartosa, but Tarshish is the old name. So it's a very plainly delineated spot.
Right, and so, and that's would be in Spain. Of course, Spain is not isles, not islands. They're part of Europe. They're in southern Europe there. It's got a few little neighboring islands, but not anything near what the British Isles are in their geography per se. But when it comes to the merchants of Tarshish, like I said, it's mentioned 7 different times. And also the other thing mentioned is they got very seaworthy ships, mentioned 9 times in the Bible, how they could actually go very long distances carrying lots of cargo and merchandise through the Mediterranean, around through the Strait of Gibraltar, through the Mediterranean, et cetera. So in the DVD, I get into all those kind of connections, which by the time we're done, and even the geopolitical, what about what's going on right now in the Middle East? Is Spain involved, or has it been Britain and France, and now, of course, America trying to broker peace deals and things like that? So I get into all those things, spend a good 15 minutes on this DVD, just connecting, sort of pinning the tail of America in this particular prophecy. And I think by the time the viewers will be done watching it, they're probably going to go, that could be where we're at. And okay, so if that's the case, then what's that really mean for Americans at this point? Well, if we're on the sidelines protesting, what happens to us from our superpower status where we're at now to where we're sitting on the sidelines going, what do you do in Russia? What do you do in Turkey? What do you do in Iran? So there's things I get into about what could happen to America between now and then as well.
Now, I can hear somebody saying out there right now, Bill, well, we've talked about Ezekiel 38 for a long, long time. And haven't we just exhausted it? Is there anything else we can find out? And you've gone the extra mile. I love the idea of, and by the way, Bill and I have been talking about this before we went on, and his research is very, very extensive, believe me.
Well, I sort of approach it, I know what you're saying. And there's some really great works out there. Ron Rhodes has a wonderful book called Northern Storm Rising, and there's a lot of good teaching on Ezekiel 38. I try to, as you know, approach these things from a little different camera angle.
Right.
Look at a few different details and see what they're really just taking a sort of a second look at some of these things. So I'm looking at who are the participants of Ezekiel 38. And then I get also into the DVD about all the other specific details. You know, God stops this formidable offense with an earthquake, fire and hailstone and brimstone. The earthquake creates, people killing each other, says they'll use their swords against each other. Of course, they got different languages and things like that. So the earthquake troubles them, they start killing each other. And then you have fire, great hailstone, and an earthquake. But the thing that's very interesting is we even have in the aftermath, talks about Israel taking the weapons that are being brought down against them and converting them into fuel. It says they'll be burning the weapons for 7 years, in which causes some of us to think, because people will say, well, when does this happen? Is this in the tribulation? Is this after the millennium? Is this,
right.
So there's a pretty strong argument case, I think, given in the clue that they're burning weapons for 7 years, that it's a pre-tribulation event, Gary.
Pre-tribulation. Now, that being the case, how close are we to this thing?
Well, we, as many of our colleagues think, we're getting very close, because you see the alliances being formed between Putin with Russia, Erdogan with Turkey, Khamenei and Iran.
Right.
They're coming together. Of course, they were involved a lot in the Syrian revolution over there, but they've got these alliances that are coming together that's closer than they've ever been before. There's still some schisms, between Turkey and Russia, et cetera, like that. But Russia is involved with Iran. They're building the nuclear power plants over there, helping them. They helped them build the Bashar nuclear reactor. They also are building two more, Bashar number 2 and Bashar number 3 in Iran, with Iran. Those will be done respectively in 2024 and 2026. These are nuclear facilities that are in a very dangerous earthquake-intensive area. They're going to help Turkey build a nuclear facility as well as they're sending them the S-400 missile defense system.
What are they thinking, Bill? I mean, to build a nuclear reactor on the shore of the Persian Gulf in an earthquake zone doesn't sound like very good planning to me.
Well, in American real estate, they say there's 3 important words. It's location, location, location.
Right.
Now, in Iran, these nuclear power plants where 3 tectonic plates actually merged. They've had earthquakes there at this place. And so apparently their 3 magic words when it comes to finding a prime piece of property is tectonic, tectonic, tectonic. You're absolutely right, because if anything happens, that'd be an earthquake or an invasion, and I believe there's a prophecy dealing with that in Jeremiah chapter 49, dealing with Elam. That's also part of the DVD. I get into that. You could have a nuclear disaster that doesn't affect all of Iran so much, because you got these Zagros mountains there, which would sort of be a barrier between Tehran and this western side of the Gulf with the ancient Elam territory, but it would spread across the Gulf to the Arab states. And the Arab states are very concerned about the Gulf Cooperative Council, because they're heavily dependent on the water from the Persian Gulf and coming through with the radiation and contamination. And I get into all of that on the DVD as well.
So, Bill has gone, as I said a moment ago, the extra mile and taken this verse 11 of Ezekiel 38, in which the enemy goes up against a land of unwalled villages. Who is the enemy? And we've talked about that, Sheba, Dedan, the merchants of Tarshish. And you have 15 listed in your study, 15 groups of people or nations.
Right, and the groups you just listed were not technically the enemies. They're not fighting with Russia's coalition. They're on the sidelines raising the red flag of concern.
Right.
Like, what are you doing, right? And I do believe that that pictures us there. And again, we could spend the whole program just talking about how I get us to there through the geographical and the geopolitical set of reasons.
Well, let's just take a minute. How do you put us in this picture? And you don't have to go as deeply as you did on the DVD, of course.
Right. Well, we talked about the mentioning of the isles. It was in Genesis chapter 10.
Right.
So we can kind of trace geographically where Tarshish came. Tarshish was the name of one of Javan's sons. And so they divided the isles of the Gentiles, and we talked about the British over there. And then we talk about where is Tarshish. Okay, well, one example we have, it's very far to the west of Israel. The example we go in Jonah chapter 1, verse 3. And Jonah was told, as the story goes, to warn Nineveh that God was going to judge them. So Jonah should have went directionally to his north and to his east, but he went down to Joppa and boarded a ship to go as far west as he could.
Right.
It says Jonah rose up to flee unto Tarshish from the presence of the Lord, and went down to Joppa, and he found a ship going to Tarshish, which was going to send him all the way as far west as he could go, beyond the Strait of Gibraltar, through the Mediterranean, up around, if Tarshish is the British Isles, it would go up around through there. We also find out in Psalm 48, verse 7, it says, thou breakest those ships of Tarshish with an east wind, referring to the Lord breaks them with an east wind. So if Tarshish would come through with their great ships, like I said, they're mentioned ships in their time, I think it's 11 times, the wind would prohibit them coming from the east as they're coming from the west toward Israel, whereas the western wind would facilitate it. So we clearly see that it's off to the west, far off to the west. But the one clue, I think, Gary, that's really important that I'd like to talk about for a second here is it talks about the merchants of Tarshish, which is the theme of the prophecy. It shows up 7 times dealing with merchants and riches of Tarshish. And one in particular, in Ezekiel 27, verse 12, it talks about Tarshish was thy, referring to Tyre, which is in Lebanon, merchants by reason of the multitude of all kinds of riches with silver, iron, tin, lead, and they traded in thy fair. So he mentions these specific minerals, and I want to just give a couple quotes. In the Now Prophecies book, so follow the line of the riches of the merchants going into Lebanon. In the Now Prophecies book I've written, it talks about, there's a quote, about 587 BC, Ezekiel acknowledged that tin was among the primary metals that came from Tarshish. Cornwall, a county of England's rugged southwestern tip, was the only major source of tin in Europe for the past 2,500 years. And so then there's other study just done by the Heidelberg University in September of 2019 that emphasizes this. It was called the ENIGMA of Bronze Age tin. And the article in a summary is, examine Bronze Age tin from the 2nd millennium BCE from Israel, Turkey, and Greece. And it says the tin artifacts, here's a conclusion from Israel, for example, largely match tin from Cornwall and Devon in Great Britain. So in other words, it's emphasis that all came, those materials, those minerals, those tin and iron and stuff came from Tarshish. Cornwall, England, the British Isles, takes us back to Tarshish. There's a couple other things archaeologically. Matter of fact, I'll read one last thing since I've got the floor on this. We get into, J.R. Church wrote in his book, The Guardians of the Grail. I think this is an archaeological aspect of why we connect the dots. It says, I'm quoting him on page 220, an inscription discovered in 1780 on a cliff from Mount Hope Bay in Bristol, Rhode Island, contained an engraving that read, Voyagers from Tarshish, this stone proclaims. Believed to be inscribed around 533 BC, Harvard University has found 5 locations within the United States where the merchants of Tarshish had colonies. So that's just the historical stuff. What about today? What's going on with after the Ottoman Empire with World War I, and what about our presidents now trying to make peace over there with the Arabs and the Jews?
And so you can see that Bill takes this to a very deep level in his studies. Again, we're talking about the prophetic Mideast wars. You should avail yourself of this DVD. There is a lot in it.
I hope you're enjoying today's program with Bill Salus. We are watching in amazement as the nations move into position and these ancient prophecies come to life. Bill's latest DVD, The Prophetic Mideast Wars, explores several Old Testament prophecies that are playing out on the world stage today. You'll be amazed when you see how close we are to the prophesied wars in the Middle East. We want you to have Bill's just released DVD for your gift of $20. Bill also has 3 additional DVDs on the end times, the Now, the Next, and the Last Prophecies. We are calling this special discounted package the Bill Salus Anthology Package, and it's available for your gift of $75. As always, shipping is included anywhere in the United States. When you support Prophecy Watchers by choosing the DVD package, you'll also receive 3 free bonuses: Prophetic Revelations for the Final Generation, plus 2 books, Uncovering the Secrets of Bible Prophecy, and the daily devotional, A Closer Look at Prophecy. To receive Bill's new DVD or the special 4-DVD package with 3 bonuses, just call the number on your screen or visit us online at prophecywatchers.tv. Our work at Prophecy Watchers is made possible because of your support. Be blessed and encouraged as you study God's Word and discover His plans for the future. Now, back to Gary and Bill.
Well, Bill, let's kind of flesh this thing out. As we think about the merchants of Tarshish objecting to the invasion of Gog, put that in just a very compact picture for me.
Well, they're concerned that their commercial interests are going to be captured by Russia, the booty and plunder. But what's of great concern, and I think why it's important on this program that we reach out to the American viewer, is say, if America is involved as a protester in Ezekiel 38, verse 13, why are we not coming to Israel's side? Why are we not helping fight against Russia and its formidable troops. We're Israel's ally. What happens to us? It puts us on the sidelines with Sheba and Dedan. Now, Sheba would probably be Yemen. Dedan would probably be parts of Saudi Arabia, maybe even part of the Gulf Cooperative Council of the Arab States. The UK probably be the Tarshish, and the Young Lions probably representing America. What happens to America right now? It looks like we've declined from superpower status down to a lesser, less exceptional nation that can only bark from the sidelines. What could happen to America between now and then? And I posit several options of what could happen to America on the DVD. We could actually have an economic collapse. Our deficit is so high right now, and with the COVID-19 thing going on, we've been printing more and more money. It's becoming monopoly money at this point.
And so you're making the point that at the time of this invasion, which can't be very far away, frankly, you and I have talked about this in the past, as this thing develops, it appears that the merchants of Tarshish are in a downward slide. They're sort of a plea. They're making a plea. They're not saying, you stop this or we'll stop you. In other words, what they're saying is, why are you doing that? Implying kind of weakness.
Exactly. Now, we can understand why the UK would be like that. So, for instance, once upon a time, there used to be a saying, the UK was the empire in which the sun would never set. When the Lord Balfour came with his declaration after World War I in 1917, at that time, the UK had control over 458 million people, which was about a fifth of the world's population, and about 13 million square miles, almost a quarter of the earth. Now, since that time, the sun always sets on the British Empire. They've got sovereignty over about 94,000 square miles and 60-some million people. But America rose to superpower status as the UK declined. What happens to us? Could it be an EMP, Gary? Maybe a nuclear attack comes upon our country that takes us out. If an EMP was launched, it's a nuclear weapon. If it's launched about 250 miles in the air, burst altitude, it could spread out like the speed of light, like a canopy, and fry all the electronics underneath it. We would be rendered defenseless. What about the rapture? Yeah. What about that as a potential judgment if God took out all the Christians, which is something we're all watching real closely these days?
Well, you've brought it up. Everybody's favorite subject, the rapture. Where do you see all of this happening relative to the rapture of the church? And I know you can't be exactly precise with this, but on the other hand, where do you see these things falling?
Well, I sequenced the events as follows, and the rapture could happen now and anywhere during or before or after these things I'm about to tell you. I think Ezekiel 38 is a pre-tribulation event. They're burning weapons for 7 years. They could burn weapons for the first 3.5 years of the tribulation, and they could burn 3.5 years prior to the tribulation, but at the midpoint of the tribulation, they're fleeing for their lives, not necessarily burning weapons. Even Jesus told Matthew 24:15, when you see the abomination and desolation, flee to the mountains, flee from the area, because the Antichrist is going to commit genocide. So I don't see that being I see that concluding 3.5 years at least before the tribulation. So I put the rapture some between, but to get there, I also put like the wars that I cover in there with Psalm 83, the destruction of Damascus, the toppling of Jordan, the Elam prophecy of Iran. There's all these different things that I think are coming at us head over heels real rapidly, that then ultimately we get to Ezekiel 38, all these things before the tribulation, all these things probably in a very short time span from now, in my estimation. And the rapture could be at any given time. We could be here for some of these prophecies. We just won't be here for the tribulation.
And the enemies surrounding Israel today could be a triggering event, right?
Absolutely. We talk about this potential annexation of territory. That's going to have some consequences, perhaps prophetic implications. Again, that's why this DVD is so timely, because we're about to see what Israel's going to do with that areas of the West Bank. They might be taking over about 30% of that territory over a phased period.
And how to do justice to this DVD, because you've put a lot of work in this and a lot of detail that we just simply don't have time to go into today. But some of the detail, we've gone through a bit, the U.S. role, some of the other things that might happen around the edges of the Ezekiel 38 event. What do you think is going to be a triggering event? Now, I know today Israel's enemies are boasting that they can hit any part of Israel with weapons of And pretty big weapons at that. I don't think they're nuclear yet, but they can besiege Israel in a bad way with their rockets.
Right. Well, I think this all is going to start with Iran, Syria, Hezbollah, Hamas, the proxies of Iran, those countries, even now in Iraq. Now you've got strong Shiite presence in Iraq. Now even the Houthis are down in Yemen. Those are proxies of Iran. Iran is the subject of two prophecies, Ezekiel 38, but also Jeremiah 49. I think that that's going to probably involve a war. Again, these are on the DVD. Iran is going to use its proxies to come against Israel. There's a recent article that come out May of 2019 on Press TV. It says Gaza matches Hezbollah, with Hamas in Gaza. Each entity can fire 1,000 missiles a day into Israel. That's a reality. Jerusalem Post in August.
Well, let's stop right there. 1,000 rockets a day into Israel. Hezbollah and
so that'd be 2,000 missiles a day coming in.
Yeah.
1,000 from the Gaza, 1,000 from Lebanon, and the Jerusalem Post says in August of 2019, Hezbollah has enough precision-guided missiles for a confrontation with Israel, and that's where they're pointed. These precision-guided missiles. Now they can carry chemicals. Article out of the NPR in February 2019, more than 300 chemical attacks were launched during the Syrian civil war. They still got chemical weapons. These are all tentacles of Iran. And I believe that's what's going to start to happen. And that's when I think Israel takes out Damascus in response to an Iran and a proxy war coming against them. They will not be able to withstand the potential firepower that's going to come against them. They will get hurt. As a matter of fact, Isaiah 17 talks about a time when Israel takes a big hit, and I get into those verses and the images of what is talked about by Isaiah in the DVD.
And by the way, America is in a position at this point, as you very well know, where we could go from being very strong to very weak in a short time. There are a lot of threats out there against the United States, which has always stood as a bulwark for Israel.
Right, and we need to remember that God can stop anything he wants in a split second. And it could be an EMP, but it could also be something, a solar flare, something like that, that can also have the same effect as an electromagnetic pulse over the country. We have to ask ourselves, is God still up, is he up in heaven singing the Star-Spangled Banner draped in the American flag, or is God concerned about the way we've said goodbye to him over the last 60 years? Is that why we see all the riots and protests and the godlessness going on in this country? That's the concern. Is our time in the sun also starting to fade?
A good word as we close today would be, if you haven't been praying for the United States, put that in your prayers more and more frequently, because things are changing. And I wish we had more time. The Prophetic Mideast Wars, lots of detail. Bill Salus, thanks very much for being here.
Thanks, Gary.
I'm Gary Stearman. We're watching. Hey, you keep watching too. Thanks for joining us on Prophecy Watchers. You can find us on the web at prophecywatchers.com, where you can sign up for our free email newsletter. In the meantime, keep watching, everybody, and we'll see you soon.